She bared herself to the doctor, but he was not who he appeared to be. Amidst scalpels and hidden notes, a dangerous desire was born. When their paths cross, desire becomes both a cure and a poison. If you love romance stories, watch until the very end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Now let's continue. The mountains of North Carolina guarded their secrets like cursed treasures, buried deep enough that no one dared to unearth them, yet close enough to the surface for their vapors to contaminate the air. In the small town of Asher's Hollow, known for its mystics and its legends, the Monroe family home stood out not for its simple soapstone architecture, but for the silence that inhabited it. A silence so dense it seemed to have taken on a life of its own, snaking through the hallways like an unseen animal that everyone pretended not to see. Amelia Monroe had known that silence for as long as she could remember. At 21, she wore it inside her chest like a second skin, more intimate than her own flesh. As the daughter of Pastor Ezekiel Monroe, one of the most respected and feared men in town, Amelia had grown up hearing that her body was a temple, not for veneration, but for confinement. A place where desires had to be locked away, where curiosity was a sin, where any manifestation of autonomy was seen as a betrayal of the memory of the mother who had gone mad from surrendering to worldly passions. Eleanor Alden, the nurse who had disappeared when Amelia was just 2 years old, now existed only in a single photograph hidden between the pages of her daughter's Bible. A woman with a restrained smile and eyes that seemed to hold a storm, the eyes of one who had known sin, as Martha, the stepmother Ezekiel had brought home less than a year after his first wife's disappearance, would say. On that April morning, with the North Carolina sky painted that painfully clear blue that precedes the change of seasons, Amelia packed her small backpack with the care of someone handling explosives. The bus to Charlotte would leave in less than an hour and she had to be on it. "The assembly is running late tonight, Father. I'm going to help Sister Agnes with organizing the church library," Amelia lied, adjusting the modest dress she always wore, even when the southern heat punished her skin. Ezekiel lifted his eyes from the book of Psalms he read every morning as a mandatory ritual. His eyes, gray as a distant storm, rested on his daughter with that peculiar mixture of love and suspicion that always made her feel small. "You've been very helpful at the church lately," he observed, his deep voice carrying that thick tone of a man who chooses each word like a stone to be thrown. "Take care that this dedication isn't hiding other interests." Amelia's heart sped up. Did he know? Had someone told him? In a small town, eyes were everywhere, and secrets rarely lasted longer than the morning dew. "It's my duty, Father. You always said we must serve." The pastor nodded slowly, returning his attention to the book, but not before adding, "Let your mother be an example." The hospital corrupted her soul before the evil one took her body. Never forget that. That mention of Eleanor, rare as diamonds in that house, made Amelia swallow hard. The hospital. Always the hospital. Since she was a child, she had heard it was a place of temptation and sin, where men and women in white hid their vices under the cloak of science. For that very reason, when her fascination with medicine began to bloom in her teens, through smuggled books and documentaries watched in secret, she knew she was challenging more than paternal authority. She was challenging the very founding myth of her confined existence. The entrance exam for the University of North Carolina at Charlotte would be the next day, and Amelia had been preparing for 3 years in secret, studying during breaks at her father's religious goods store, in the silent hours of the night, in moments when everyone thought she was reading the Bible. She left the house feeling the weight of Martha's gaze, the stepmother who never confronted her, but also never defended her, a woman who existed as a shadow, always lurking, always silent. Amelia sometimes wondered if that would be her fate too, to become a voiceless presence, a woman whose existence served only to reflect the expectations of others. The bus to Charlotte was nearly empty on that weekday morning. Amelia sat in the back, hiding behind a biology textbook. The 3-hour journey seemed to stretch like a rubber band that could snap at any moment. As the Appalachian Mountains passed by the window, each curve in the road seemed to take her further from the destiny her father had mapped out for her, to marry a deacon's son, have children, and become the example of a Christian woman her mother had failed to be. In Charlotte, The state's capital received her with its fast pace and its architecture that mixed colonial with modern, a contrast that always fascinated her. Amelia had visited the city only a few times, always on church excursions, always under supervision. Now, alone, she felt like a bird that doesn't quite know what to do with its sudden freedom. She made her way to the simple guest house where she had booked a room. She needed to rest before the next day's exam, review her notes, prepare herself mentally. That's when the first twinge came, a sharp spasm in her lower abdomen that made her double over. She ignored it. It must have been just nerves, anxiety. She had always had a weak stomach for strong emotions. But as the night wore on, the pain intensified, spreading like malignant roots throughout her abdomen. At 3 in the morning, drenched in a cold sweat, Amelia realized this was no simple discomfort. The guest house receptionist, a grey-haired woman with a compassionate look, called a taxi and recommended the nearest hospital, Sterling Medical Center, a private institution in the city's central district. "It's expensive, my dear, but it's the best. And it's only 2 blocks from here," the woman explained, helping Amelia into the cab. The hospital rose imposingly against the night sky, a neoclassical building with high windows and a bluish illumination that gave it an almost surreal appearance. In the entrance hall, the Italian marble reflected Amelia's desperation as she struggled to stay on her feet. "Do you have insurance?" asked the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly painted nails and a bored expression. Amelia shook her head. She had saved for years to pay for the exam application and the trip. But private medical care was completely out of her reach. "I'll try the county hospital then," she murmured, preparing to leave. "Wait." The voice, deep and authoritative, came from a man who had just entered the lobby. Tall, with sharp features that gave him a severe beauty, and eyes of a grey so deep they seemed almost silver under the artificial light, he wore an impeccable white coat over obviously expensive clothes. A discreet but certainly valuable watch adorned his left wrist, and his precisely cut black hair framed a face that seemed sculpted to intimidate. "Dr. Sterling," the receptionist immediately changed her tone, abandoning boredom for something bordering on submission. "The patient is clearly in pain." "Arrange for her admission," he ordered, then turned to Amelia. "Follow me." It wasn't a request, it was an order. And Amelia, accustomed to obeying, followed him automatically, even as a voice in her mind wondered how she would pay for this later. Dr. Dante Sterling, as she discovered upon reading the badge on his coat, led her personally through silent corridors to an examination room. He said nothing more until the door was closed, and when he did, his voice had lost some of its cutting authority, replaced by a professional neutrality. "Please, sit on the examination table. I'm Dr. Dante Sterling, General Surgeon and Chief Medical Officer of this hospital. I'm going to do an initial assessment." Amelia obeyed, still feeling waves of pain coursing through her body. The doctor approached with a clipboard. "Full name?" "Amelia Monroe." Something almost imperceptible flickered across the doctor's face. Recognition, perhaps? Annoyance? Whatever it was, it lasted only an instant before the mask of professionalism returned. "Age?" 21. "Where are you from, Amelia?" "Ashes Hollow. What brings you to Charlotte?" Amelia hesitated. To tell him about the exam would be to admit the lie to her father, to expose her small rebellion to a stranger. "I came to visit a friend from church." The doctor stared at her for a moment too long, as if he could see through the improvised lie, but he didn't press. "When did the pain start?" "Tonight. It's been getting gradually worse." He asked a few more technical questions about associated symptoms, medical history, allergies, noting everything with surprisingly legible handwriting. Then he asked for permission to examine her abdomen. "I'll need to palpate the area. It might be uncomfortable." The doctor's hands were firm and precise, but as they touched Amelia's exposed skin, something strange happened. An almost electric current ran through her body, and it wasn't just pain. It was something she had never felt before. An acute awareness of a man's touch on her skin, of the warmth emanating from those fingers, of the proximity of this man who carried a disturbing magnetism. Dr. Sterling must have felt something too, because for a brief moment his hands hesitated, and his eyes met hers with a disconcerting intensity. Amelia looked away, feeling her face burn. "I suspect appendicitis," he said finally, stepping back and reassuming his clinical tone. "We'll need to run some tests to confirm." "I'm admitting you for observation." "Doctor, I can't afford this," Amelia managed to say, shame mixing with the pain. "Don't worry about that now," he replied, and there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. "We'll address that issue after we've taken care of your health." A nurse entered shortly after, carrying forms and instructions. Dr. Sterling gave a few quick orders and prepared to leave, but stopped at the door as if remembering something. "What is your father's name, Amelia?" The question caught her off guard. "Ezekiel Monroe. He's a pastor in Ashes Hollow." The doctor nodded slowly, his face now completely unreadable. "And your mother?" Amelia felt a tightness in her chest, as always happened when she had to explain. "Eleanor Alden, she's no longer with us." For an instant, so brief it could have been her imagination, Amelia thought she saw a tremor cross the doctor's face, a shadow pass through those grey eyes. But then he simply nodded and left the room, leaving behind only the echo of his firm footsteps and a discreet scent of sandalwood and something else Amelia couldn't identify. The nurse who stayed to help her with the admission preparations was young and talkative, a welcome contrast to the doctor's silent intensity. "Dr. Sterling doesn't usually see patients in the ER," she commented as she helped Amelia change. "You're lucky. He's considered one of the best surgeons in the country." "Why was he in the emergency room then?" The nurse shrugged. "He owns the hospital, comes and goes as he pleases. They say he has chronic insomnia and often makes his rounds at night alone. Who can understand the rich, right?" Rich. The word stood out in Amelia's mind. Of course he was rich. The watch, the clothes, the posture, the fact that he owned an entire hospital. They belonged to completely different worlds, as distant as Earth and Saturn. "Where are you taking me?" Amelia asked, realizing they were going up to a higher floor than expected. "East Wing, room 23, the nurse replied, consulting her clipboard. "Direct orders from Dr. Sterling." There was something odd in the way the nurse said it, a slight frown that didn't go unnoticed by Amelia. "Is there something wrong with that room?" The nurse hesitated for a moment, but then smiled, brushing away any shadow of doubt. "No, it's just, well, it's one of the most luxurious rooms in the hospital, usually reserved for very important patients. Once again, you're lucky." But Amelia knew a half-truth when she heard one. She had grown up amidst them in the deafening silence of her home. There was something more to that room, something the nurse wasn't saying. Room 23 was indeed impressive. Spacious, with a sober yet elegant decor, it had large windows that would certainly offer a panoramic view of the city at dawn. The hospital bed, though obviously medical, was fitted with sheets that seemed more suited to a five-star hotel, and there was a comfortable armchair next to it, along with a dark wood nightstand. "The bathroom is over there," the nurse pointed to a door. "It has everything you need, toiletries, clean towels. Oh, and the TV remote is in the drawer. Dr. Sterling will see you in the morning, and in the meantime, the nursing staff will be monitoring your condition." Amelia thanked her, and when she was finally alone, she allowed herself to relax a little. The pain medication they had administered was beginning to take effect, and the floating sensation was almost pleasant. She looked around, still impressed by the luxury that surrounded her. She had never been in a place like this. That's when she first noticed something strange on the wall opposite the bed, an almost imperceptible line, as if part of the wall had been rebuilt, repainted. Curious, she got up carefully and approached it. The line formed a vertical rectangle, about the size of a door. She ran her fingers over the surface, feeling a slight difference in texture. It was as if an entrance had once existed there, now sealed and disguised. A sudden wave of dizziness made her lean against the wall. It must be the medication or the pain or the exhaustion. She returned to bed, lying down with a sigh. The soft lights and the silence of the room began to lull her to sleep, but before she drifted off completely, a thought arose, hazy but disturbing. Why had this powerful doctor, the owner of the hospital, taken a personal interest in her case? Why had he asked about her parents? And why had he assigned her to this specific room, which was clearly not for ordinary patients? Before she could elaborate on these questions, sleep took her completely, plunging her into restless dreams where endless corridors always led to the same place. A locked room where a woman who looked very much like her stared out the window, waiting for someone who would never come. Amelia awoke to the morning sun flooding the room. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories of the previous night returned. The pain, the hospital, the doctor with grey eyes. Along with the memories came the realization, the entrance exam. It was today. She sat up abruptly, feeling a twinge in the right side of her abdomen. The pain had subsided, but it was still there, a reminder that she was in no condition to sit for a multi-hour exam. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. 3 years of secret preparation, the courage gathered to finally defy her father. The trip planned in minute detail, all for nothing because of appendicitis. The door to the room opened, and Dr. Dante Sterling entered, accompanied by a different nurse from the night before. This one was older, with grey hair in a severe bun, and an experienced gaze that seemed to catalogue every detail of Amelia. "Good morning, Miss Monroe. How are you feeling?" The doctor's voice was controlled, professional, but there was something in his eyes as he watched her, an intensity that didn't match the casual tone. "Better? The pain has lessened." He nodded, approaching to check her vitals on the monitor. "We ran some tests while you were sleeping. It's not appendicitis, as I initially suspected." A momentary relief washed over Amelia. "So I can leave?" she asked, thinking she might still make it in time for the exam. "No," he replied, his tone categorical. "The results point to an inflammation of the right ovary. We need to do more tests, understand the cause. You'll be hospitalized for at least 48 hours. Amelia's world collapsed. 48 hours meant she would miss the exam. It also meant she would have to explain to her father where she was, what she was doing in Charlotte. "I can't stay," she said, almost in despair. "I have an important engagement today, and my father doesn't know I'm here. He'll—" She stopped, realizing she was saying too much. The doctor was watching her with renewed attention. "Your father will what, Amelia?" There was something in the way he said her name, a familiarity that shouldn't exist, a care that made no sense. "Nothing. He'll just be worried." Dr. Sterling gestured to the nurse, who quietly left the room, closing the door. Then, to Amelia's surprise, he sat in the armchair beside the bed, shedding some of his formal posture. "You came for the UNC entrance exam, didn't you?" Amelia felt her face burn. How did he know? "The biology book in your bag," he explained, as if reading her mind. "No one reads comparative histology for fun, and the date coincides with the exam period. Yes, my father doesn't know. He wouldn't approve." "Medicine?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that suggested he already knew the answer. Amelia nodded, surprised at how easily she admitted it to a stranger when she had never been able to say it openly to anyone in Asher's Hollow. "Your father is a pastor, you said, Ezekiel Monroe." The doctor pronounced the name slowly, as if testing the sound. "And he doesn't want his daughter to study medicine. Is there a specific reason for that?" The question was strange, too personal for a doctor who had just met her. Amelia hesitated. "My father has reservations about the hospital environment," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "He believes it's what led my mother to stray from her faith." "Your mother, Eleanor Alden," he said the name as if he had memorized it. "She was a nurse, correct?" Amelia's heart sped up. How could he know that? She hadn't mentioned her mother's profession. "How do you know that?" For a moment, Dr. Sterling seemed flustered, as if he had made a slip, but he recovered quickly. "You mentioned it yesterday during admission," he replied, and before she could argue, he changed the subject. "As for the exam, I'm sorry you can't attend, but your health is more important. If it's truly your desire, there will be other opportunities." "You don't understand. I won't have another opportunity. My father won't let me." "You're 21, Amelia. Legally, you're an adult." "In theory," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "But in practice, as long as I live under his roof, following his rules. It's complicated." Something in the doctor's expression changed, a flicker of what? Understanding, empathy, recognition. "I understand more than you can imagine," he said, his voice now softer. "I also grew up under strict rules, suffocating expectations. I know what it's like to have your dreams pruned in the name of tradition." For the first time since meeting him, Amelia saw something beyond the authoritarian and distant doctor. She glimpsed a human being, someone who, despite all his evident privileges, seemed to carry his own scars. "How did you escape?" she asked, genuinely curious. A sad, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. "Who said I escaped?" he replied enigmatically, then stood up, reassuming his formal posture. "I'll send a nurse to collect more samples for tests. Rest, Amelia, and don't worry about the financial issue. Your case is being treated as special." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could contain it, and for an instant the doctor seemed genuinely surprised by her audacity. "Because I believe in your potential," he finally answered. "And because, unlike your father, I think the world needs more brilliant minds in medicine, not fewer." With those words he left, leaving Amelia with more questions than answers. The following hours passed in a blur of tests, nurse visits and snacks brought on elegant trays. Amelia tried to call the guest house where she was staying, asking them to hold her things for another day, but the real problem was her father. She needed to let him know she wouldn't be back today, but how could she explain where she was without revealing the truth? She settled on a half-truth. She sent a message saying the friend she was visiting had fallen ill, and she would need to stay another day to help her. She knew this excuse wouldn't last long. Her father would soon demand the friend's number, address, details she couldn't provide, but it would buy her some time. In the middle of the afternoon, while flipping through a magazine found in the nightstand drawer, Amelia noticed something that had escaped her attention before. A name discreetly engraved in the corner of the dark wood. E.A., the same initials as her mother, Eleanor Alden. It could be a coincidence, of course, but added to everything else, the doctor's unusual interest, his knowledge about her mother, the luxurious room specifically assigned to her, it was starting to form a disturbing pattern. She got up and went back to examine the wall with the nearly invisible line. This time she pressed lightly on the surface, surprised to feel it give a little. It wasn't a normal wall. There was something behind it, a space. Her heart raced as her fingers traced the outline of what could only be a secret door, hidden by a recent renovation. She tried to find a way to open it, but there was no handle, no visible mechanism. Frustrated, she rested her forehead against the cool surface, trying to imagine what could be on the other side. That's when she heard, or thought she heard, a whisper from the other side. A female voice so low it could have been just the hum of the ventilation system. Amelia took a step back, a chill running down her spine. Was she becoming paranoid? Were the medications affecting her mind? A sound at the room's door startled her. She turned just in time to see Dr. Sterling entering again, this time alone. He stopped upon seeing her standing near the wall, and his gaze narrowed slightly. "You should be resting," he said, but his tone wasn't one of scolding. It seemed more cautious. "I'm bored," Amelia replied, quickly returning to the bed, and confused. "This room. Why did you put me in here?" The doctor closed the door behind him and approached slowly, as if measuring each step. "It's one of the best rooms in the hospital." "But why me? I'm just another patient, one who can't even pay for her care." He stopped at the foot of the bed, staring at her with that disconcerting intensity he seemed to reserve only for her. "You are not just another patient." "Amelia." The silence that followed was so thick she could almost touch it. There was something in his eyes, a momentary vulnerability, an opening that revealed an ocean of contained secrets. "Why not?" "What am I to you?" Dr. Sterling looked away for the first time, gazing at the window where the afternoon sun cast long shadows. "This room," he began, his voice now lower. "It has a history. Like all the old things in this hospital." "What history?" Amelia asked, feeling they were on the verge of some important revelation. He hesitated, as if weighing how much he should say. "This hospital wasn't always what it is today," he said finally. "When my grandfather founded it, almost 50 years ago, it was a psychiatric institute. The treatment methods were different back then, less humane. And this room? It was part of the women's wing, reserved for special cases." The way he said special made Amelia shiver. What kind of cases? The kind families preferred to keep secret, he answered with a surprising bitterness. Women who didn't fit the expected mold, women who challenged conventions, who had their own desires, who dared to think for themselves. Many were committed by their own husbands, fathers, brothers, diagnosed with hysteria, melancholia, immoral tendencies. Amelia felt a knot in her stomach, immediately thinking of her own mother, of the story they always told about her, that she had gone mad, that she had lost her way. The hospital was completely renovated in the 90s. When my father took over, Dr. Sterling continued, the psychiatric wing was decommissioned, and the focus shifted to general medicine and surgery. Most of the rooms in the old wing were turned into administrative offices, but this one was preserved. Renovated, modernized, but still the same space. Why? The question hung in the air for a moment, heavy as lead. So that no one would forget, he answered simply, and then added, I know it sounds strange, but I believe you are here for a reason, Amelia. Perhaps to break a cycle. What cycle? But before he could answer, the door opened again and the grey-haired nurse entered with an urgent expression. Dr. Sterling, there's a call for you. It sounds important. The doctor nodded, the moment of openness evaporating like dew under the sun. He was back to being the distant professional. Rest, Amelia. He'll be back later to discuss the results of the new tests. And with that he left, leaving her with more questions than ever. Amelia lay back down, her thoughts a whirlwind. There was something about this place, about this doctor, that seemed directly connected to her past, to the mother she never knew, to the silence that had always suffocated her home. As the sun slowly set over Charlotte, painting the room in shades of amber and copper, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering truths that, once revealed, would change everything forever. And for the first time in her life, the fear of that change was less than the desire to finally know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Lying in that hospital bed, so far from the controlled life she had always led, Amelia was certain of one thing. She was no longer the same person who had left Asher's Hollow that morning. Something fundamental had shifted, as if the first brick in an invisible prison had finally come loose. And now there was only one way forward, through that crack in the wall towards freedom, no matter what she found on the other side. Room 23 held secrets that seemed to call out to her, and the enigmatic figure of Dr. Dante Sterling, with his grey eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface, was the key to a mystery she was only just beginning to comprehend. A mystery that somehow Amelia felt was intertwined with her own destiny, like threads of an ancient tapestry finally beginning to unravel. As night fell over the hospital, bringing with it silence and shadows, Amelia fell asleep with a question echoing in her mind. Who, after all, was Dante Sterling, and why did he seem to know more about her mother, and perhaps about herself, than anyone had ever revealed? The night at Sterling Medical Center stretched out like a thread of black silk, endless and fragile. Amelia woke several times restless, feeling watched even in the solitude of room 23. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance with a life of their own, and the hum of the ventilation system sometimes sounded like distant feminine voices, whispering secrets she couldn't decipher. When dawn finally gave way to the first light of morning, Amelia was exhausted, more from the mental turmoil than the physical pain, which had now reduced to a persistent but tolerable ache. She sat up in bed watching the sunrise over Charlotte, a sight that, under other circumstances, she would have found breathtaking. The city stretched as far as the eye could see, a labyrinth of buildings, avenues, and parks that contrasted sharply with the small town of Asher's Hollow, where the horizon was dominated by mountains and sky. A small breakfast was brought by a young, quiet attendant who smiled politely but didn't start a conversation. Amelia noted that unlike the public hospitals she knew, where several patients shared the same space and staff visits were constant, here she remained isolated, as if in a cocoon of luxury and silence. Only designated professionals entered, and even then, with an almost reverential discretion. After breakfast, the older nurse, who introduced herself as Regina, came to check her vitals. "How are you feeling today, dear?" she asked with a kindness that seemed genuine, though her eyes observed Amelia with an attention that went beyond medical protocol. "Better. The pain has lessened quite a bit." Regina nodded, jotting something on her clipboard. Dr. Sterling will be in to see you shortly. He asked to be personally informed of any change in your condition. Is that common? Amelia asked, trying to sound casual. For the hospital director to follow such a simple case. An enigmatic smile curved Regina's lips. Dr. Dante has always been peculiar in his choices. I've worked with him for almost 20 years, and I still can't predict his actions. There was something in Regina's tone, a mix of respect and caution that intrigued Amelia. You know him well. Then? As well as anyone can know Dante Sterling, the nurse replied, adjusting the blood pressure cuff. I grew up watching the Sterling family build their empire. I worked here when it was still the Institute, in the days of old Dr. Augustus, the grandfather. I saw his father, Dr. Anthony, transform this place, and I've seen Dante since he was a boy, carrying the weight of the name and the legacy. What legacy? Regina seemed to measure her words carefully. The Sterlings have always been pioneers in American medicine, but like all pioneering, there were costs, experiments that would be considered unethical today, controversial treatments, difficult decisions made in the name of medical progress. Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. What kind of experiments? The nurse finished checking her blood pressure and began to pack up the equipment. It's not my place to talk about it, she said, but then lowered her voice. What I can say is that Dante carries the scars of mistakes that weren't even his, especially after what happened to his sister. What happened? Now I'm talking too much. Regina smiled, but it was a tense smile. Dr. Sterling will be here soon. If you're lucky, he might answer your questions himself. He seems different with you. Before Amelia could press her, the nurse left, leaving her with more pieces of the puzzle forming in her mind. There was something about that family, that hospital, that seemed both dark and fascinating. And somehow her own story, her mother's story, seemed intertwined with it all. She got out of bed feeling stronger and re-examined the room with greater attention. This time she noticed details that had escaped her before. The window frame, made of a different, newer wood than the rest of the casing, a small mark on the baseboard, as if something heavy had been dragged across it repeatedly, and, most intriguing, a slight misalignment in the wallpaper near that almost invisible line she had noticed the day before. Driven by an impulse, Amelia approached the wall and pressed lightly on the misaligned area. To her surprise, she felt a slight movement, as if a hidden mechanism had been triggered. The almost imperceptible sound of a click was followed by a sigh of air, and a section of the wall moved a few millimeters inward. Amelia's heart pounded. There was indeed a door there, hidden by the renovation. Cautiously, she pushed a little more, and the door gave way, revealing a narrow, dark space on the other side. A passage, a secret corridor that seemed to extend beyond what her vision could reach in the dim light. She hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. What could be in there? Why would a modern hospital keep secret passages? And more importantly, what did this have to do with her? Before she could make a decision, she heard footsteps approaching in the outer hallway. Quickly, she pushed the door back, feeling it fit perfectly into the wall, becoming almost invisible again. She was back in bed seconds before the room door opened, revealing Dr. Dante Sterling. He was wearing a dark suit today, without the white coat, which made him look even more imposing. His grey eyes scanned the room briefly before focusing on her, and Amelia had the unsettling feeling that he knew exactly what she had been doing. Good morning. Amelia. His voice was controlled, professional, but there was a slight tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there the day before. How are you feeling? Much better, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I think I can go home today. He approached, consulting the clipboard with her test results. The results are good, the inflammation has subsided, but I'd like to keep you under observation for another 24 hours, he said. And then surprisingly added, unless you're anxious to get back to your father. The comment, made in an almost casual tone, caught Amelia off guard. There was something provocative about it, as if the doctor were trying to read her reaction. Actually, I'm not, she admitted. But I can't stay here forever, Dr. Sterling, and there's still the matter of payment. I've already told you not to worry about that. But why? Amelia insisted. Why are you treating me specially? He faced her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. A long time ago, I promised myself I would do what I could to help young people escape. Limiting situations, he finally answered. especially when I see potential being wasted because of outdated dogmas. So that's all it is? A kind of personal philanthropy? A minimal, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. You're direct, Amelia. That's rare and refreshing. I grew up in an environment where people rarely say what they really think, she replied. I've learned to value honesty, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. At least the pain of the truth has a purpose. The pain of silence is just empty. Something in his expression changed, an almost imperceptible softening, an opening. He sat in the armchair beside the bed, a gesture that reduced the hierarchical distance between them. Tell me about your mother. Amelia, he asked, his tone now less clinical, more personal. The question surprised her. Amelia rarely spoke about Eleanor, partly because she knew so little, partly because the topic was practically forbidden at home. There's not much to tell. She disappeared when I was 2. Officially, they say she had a nervous breakdown, that she got involved with a patient at the psychiatric hospital where she worked, and that she died during an episode. But you don't believe that. It wasn't a question, and that intrigued Amelia even more. How could he know her most intimate doubts? There are things that don't make sense, she admitted, feeling strangely comfortable sharing something she had never said aloud. Dates that don't add up, records my father hides, and the way everyone avoids talking about her. It's like there's something more, something no one wants me to know. Dr. Sterling nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. And what if I told you I could help you find out the truth about Eleanor Alden? Amelia's heart raced. How? Why? The how would involve access to old records, people who knew her, places where she was. He paused, as if carefully considering his next words. As for the why, let's just say I have personal reasons for wanting the truth about certain practices at this hospital to come to light. What practices? Amelia asked, leaning forward, feeling they were getting to something crucial. The doctor seemed about to answer when his phone vibrated. He checked it with an expression of annoyance. I have to take this. It's an emergency, he said, standing up. But we will continue this conversation. In the meantime, I suggest you rest. And Amelia. He hesitated, looking at her with intensity. Be careful which doors you decide to open in this place. Some revelations require preparation. With those enigmatic words he left, leaving Amelia with the strong impression that he knew about the secret passage she had discovered. More than that, it seemed he was, in a way, testing her, watching her reactions, assessing how far she would go in search of the truth. The next few hours passed slowly. Amelia had lunch, flipped through magazines, watched a little television, but her mind was fixed on the secret passage and Dr. Sterling's insinuations. In the middle of the afternoon, when the hallway seemed especially quiet, she made up her mind. She would investigate the passage. She checked that the room door was firmly closed and then returned to the wall, pressing the same spot she had discovered earlier. The hidden door yielded again, revealing the darkness on the other side. This time, Amelia took her phone to use as a flashlight and, taking a deep breath, stepped into the passage. The air was cool and slightly dusty, with a peculiar odor, like old, forgotten book pages. The passage was narrow, but tall enough for her to walk upright. The walls were bare concrete, unfinished, clearly not meant to be seen. She moved forward cautiously, lighting the way with her phone. The passage extended for a few meters before making a turn. As she rounded the corner, Amelia found herself in a small circular room, something like a hub from which other passages branched off. On the walls of this space, to her surprise, were old framed photographs, black and white images of what appeared to be the hospital in its early years. In one, a group of doctors in white coats posed solemnly in front of the main entrance. In the center, an older man with a severe expression held what looked like an inaugural plaque, Sterling Institute for Mental Wellness, 1952. In another photo, a hospital ward with several beds lined up showed nurses in old-fashioned uniforms tending to patients. The phone's light revealed, written in pencil on the back of the frame, the inscription, Women's Wing Special Cases. A chill ran through Amelia. Special cases, the same words Dr. Sterling had used to describe the patients of room 23 in the past, but it was the third photograph that made her blood run cold. An image of a group of nurses, dated 1998, with a name written in pen directly on the photo, Next to a young woman with a serious expression and intense eyes, even in black and white, Eleanor Alden, head nurse East Wing, her mother. There in that very hospital, just 4 years before her own birth. Amelia felt her legs weaken. Her father had always said Eleanor worked at a psychiatric hospital in the capital, but he had never mentioned which one. And Dr. Sterling clearly knew, perhaps from the very beginning. Taking a deep breath to control her emotion, Amelia examined the other passages leading from the central hub. 3 in total, each likely leading to different areas of the hospital. She chose the one on the left, which seemed slightly wider than the others. This passage was longer, and Amelia noticed it sloped gently downward, as if leading to a lower level of the building. Eventually, she reached an old wooden door, different from the modern architecture of the rest of the hospital. It was heavy with ornate hardware that seemed to belong to another era. She cautiously pressed the handle, fearing it was locked, but to her surprise, the door opened smoothly without a sound, as if it had been recently oiled, used regularly. Beyond it was a large room vaguely lit by a few emergency lights. From the architecture and the few pieces of antique furniture that remained, Amelia deduced it must have been part of the original psychiatric wing. Metal file cabinets lined one wall, and a large dark wood table dominated the center of the room. On it, folders and documents were organized in neat piles, as if someone were in the middle of research. She approached cautiously, aware that she was trespassing in what seemed to be someone's private space, possibly Dr. Sterling's own. The dim light forced her to use her phone again to see the documents better. They were old medical files, some yellowed with age. All were for women, all from the old East Wing, and all presented similar diagnoses: hysteria, behavioral deviation, immoral tendencies, acute melancholia, nymphomania. One particular file, open on the table, caught her eye. On the cover a name, the Redemption Protocol, and inside, detailed documentation of an experimental treatment conducted on female patients between 1990 and 2000, exactly the period her mother had worked there. The protocol, described in cold clinical language, involved a combination of drug therapy and behavioral conditioning to cure moral and emotional deviations in women considered problematic by their families. In practice, from what Amelia could understand with her limited knowledge, it was a modern form of brainwashing, using psychoactive drugs and psychological manipulation techniques. The following pages contained case reports with coded names. Patient EI-23, Patient MF-17, Patient RS-31. Amelia flipped through them quickly, her heart hammering against her chest until a specific code made her stop. Patient EA-23, EA, Eleanor Alden, and 23, the number of the room she was now in. The report for this case was more detailed than the others. Patient EA-23, head nurse of the East Wing, admitted voluntarily after discovery of an inappropriate relationship with a member of the board. Exhibits resistance to treatment and constant questioning of methods. Pregnancy confirmed in the 2nd month of admission. Recommend intensification of the Redemption Protocol and transfer to the private wing after delivery. Below, a handwritten note in an elegant script. Transfer to Ashes Hollow approved. Arrangements made with local pastor for supervised adoption of the child. Patient considers herself fit to be a mother, but psychiatric evaluation contradicts this perception. Continuous monitoring of the child for signs of hereditary instability is necessary. And then a final note, dated 2003. Patient escaped during a supervised visit. Suspicious circumstances. Internal investigation underway. Redemption protocol temporarily suspended by direct order of Dr. A. Sterling. Amelia felt the world spin around her. Her mother hadn't gone mad, hadn't abandoned her family. She had been committed, possibly against her will, disguised as voluntary, for being pregnant by someone on the hospital's board. And then, somehow, her father had gotten involved, agreeing to raise the child, her. And then, when Amelia was 2, her mother had escaped under suspicious circumstances. Tears began to stream down her face as the pieces clicked into a horrific narrative. Her entire life had been built on lies. Was the man she called father not her biological father? Was her mother's madness a fabrication? And who was her real father? the member of the board mentioned in the report. So engrossed was she in her discoveries that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching. When the voice sounded calm and resigned, Amelia almost dropped her phone in shock. "I knew you would find your way here." Dr. Dante Sterling was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her with an unreadable expression. He didn't seem angry to find her there, invading what was clearly a restricted area. He seemed relieved. You knew about my mother the whole time," Amelia accused, her voice trembling with emotion. He nodded slowly, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "Yes, and I was hoping you would be strong enough to discover the truth on your own," he said, approaching the table. "Some secrets need to be unearthed by the right person at the right time. Who are you really? What do you have to do with my mother?" she demanded, feeling a courage born of shock and outrage. Dr. Sterling sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair in a rare human gesture. "Who I am is complicated, Amelia. What I have to do with Eleanor, even more so." He approached the table, lightly touching the documents she had been reading. "My grandfather created this hospital with a vision we would consider monstrous today, to cure any behavior that deviated from the social expectations of the time. My father continued his work, modernizing the methods but keeping the essence. And he paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I inherited the legacy, the secrets, and the guilt. The redemption protocol. Was that your idea?" "No," he answered quickly, almost offended by the suggestion. "It was my father who developed it. I had just graduated from medical school when I discovered what was happening here. I was horrified, tried to convince him to stop. But then what?" Dr. Sterling walked to one of the file cabinets, opening a specific drawer and pulling out a folder that looked like it had been handled frequently. "Then my younger sister, Clara, started showing what my father called worrying tendencies," he continued, opening the folder to reveal a photograph of a beautiful young woman with the same grey eyes as him. She was 16, in love with a female classmate, questioning paternal authority, dreaming of being a photographer instead of a doctor. "And he had her committed," Amelia concluded, beginning to understand the scale of the tragedy. "Yes, against my express wishes, but I was too young, with no real power in the hospital yet. He subjected her to the protocol, convincing me it was for her own good, that it would protect her from herself." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "I supervised the treatment, believing I could shield her from the harshest aspects. It was my greatest mistake." "What happened to her?" "She died," he answered simply, the old pain still evident in his eyes. "Officially suicide. But in reality, it was an adverse reaction to one of the experimental drugs. I should have seen the signs sooner. I should have stopped the treatment. But I trusted my father's science, the institution that bore our name." Amelia felt an unexpected compassion rise amidst the turmoil of her emotions. "And my mother? How did she get involved in this?" Dr. Sterling closed his sister's folder, carefully placing it back in the drawer. "Eleanor was brilliant. An exceptional nurse with a rare intuition and a compassion that made her beloved by the patients," he explained. And there was a genuine respect in his voice. "She was hired shortly after Clara's death. I was destroyed, removed from the hospital's administration, drowning in guilt. My father took full control and the protocol continued. But Eleanor found out what was happening. More than that," he smiled faintly, a sad smile. "She began to document everything, to gather evidence, and to secretly help some patients resist the treatment, to maintain their identity, to not lose themselves completely." "And that's when she got involved with someone from the board?" Amelia asked, both dreading and longing for the answer. Dr. Sterling looked at her for a long time, his grey eyes finally softening. "She got involved with me. Amelia." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Amelia felt her heart race, her mind trying to process what she had just heard. You're my father." The question, so direct, so laden with emotion, made Dr. Sterling look away for a moment. "Biologically, yes, though I didn't have the privilege of raising you." Amelia felt the floor disappear from under her. It was too much to absorb at once. Her mother, her real father, the sinister plot that had shaped her destiny before she was even born. She swayed slightly, and Dr. Sterling, her father, moved quickly to steady her, guiding her to a chair. "I need to tell you everything. From the beginning, he said, pulling up another chair to sit opposite her. You deserve to hate me afterward, but first, you need to understand. And so, in the gloom of that forgotten room, Dante Sterling told the full story. How he had met Eleanor when she was hired. How he had initially kept his distance, traumatized by his sister's death. How he had gradually begun to notice the nurse's small acts of rebellion. She would leave poems for the patients, whisper words of encouragement when no one was looking, swap medications for placebos when she could, he recounted with evident admiration. When I finally confronted her, expecting to fire her, she confronted me back. She showed me the records she had collected, made me see clearly what I already knew deep down. My family's hospital was destroying lives in the name of social control disguised as medicine. And you fell in love, Amelia concluded. Now seeing in Dante features she recognized in her own face, the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. Yes, it was fast, intense, and in my father's eyes unforgivable, he continued, when he found out not just about our relationship but about our conspiracy to expose the protocol. He used everything in his power to separate us. Eleanor was declared mentally unstable, a manipulative hysteric who had seduced the director's emotionally vulnerable son. I was sent away for specialization abroad. When I returned 3 months later, I found out she was pregnant and had been committed as a patient. And you did nothing? Amelia asked, a hint of anger rising through the confusion. I did everything I could, which wasn't enough, he answered bitterly. My father had complete control of the hospital, allies in every government agency. Any attempt to expose him was quickly silenced. When I realized I couldn't free her immediately, I focused on making sure you, at least, would be safe. So you gave me to a fundamentalist pastor. Is that what you call safety? The accusation hit Dante like a physical blow. He closed his eyes for a moment. It was Eleanor who chose Ezekiel, he said finally. He was her distant cousin, her only living relative. At the time, he wasn't the fanatic he later became. He was strict, yes, but respected in the community. She believed he would help her hide when she managed to escape. But she never did, Amelia murmured, feeling tears return to her eyes. She did, actually, Dante corrected, his voice now almost a whisper. When you were 2, I arranged everything. I forged documents, bribed guards, prepared a new identity for both of you in another state. On the planned night, I helped her escape during a supervised visit to you in Asher's Hollow. So what went wrong? Why did she never come back for me? The pain in Dante's eyes was so deep it seemed bottomless. My father found out. He sent men after her. There was an accident on the road. He paused, visibly struggling with the emotion. The car went off the road on a mountain curve. When I got to the scene, it was too late. Eleanor had died on impact. Amelia covered her mouth with her hand, feeling the weight of the truth finally crash down on her. Her mother hadn't abandoned them. She was coming back, trying to save her, when she was murdered. Was it an accident or... I could never prove anything, Dante replied, the old anger returning to his voice. The driver who was chasing her also died. My father denied any involvement, and I had no way to publicly accuse my own family without concrete proof. And after, Amelia asked, feeling there was still more to this dark story. After, I did. The only thing I could, I gradually took control of the hospital. When my father died 5 years ago, I completely transformed the institution, eliminated all questionable practices, financially compensated many of the former victims. He looked around at the files. And I began to document everything, to gather evidence to one day fully expose what happened here, so that no one else would go through what Eleanor, Clara, and so many others went through. And me? Why did you never look for me? It was the question that weighed the most, the one whose answer Amelia both feared and desired. I tried, many times, he answered, his voice now thick with emotion. I sent letters, anonymous gifts, all intercepted by Ezekiel, who, after Eleanor's death, transformed into the bitter, controlling man you know. He knew who I was, threatened to go public with distorted stories about the hospital if I tried to get close to you. At the time, the hospital was still recovering from the scandals, and I feared the negative publicity would destroy all the reform work I was doing. So you just gave up? Never, the word came out with surprising force. I hired people to watch over you from a distance to ensure you were okay. I created a trust fund in your name that you will receive when you turn 25, and I waited for our paths to cross naturally someday. Like they have now, Amelia concluded, beginning to understand. It wasn't a coincidence that I was brought to this exact hospital, to this room. Dante finally allowed himself a small smile. I confess I had a little help from fate. I maintain a discreet monitoring of your name in all the hospitals in the region. When I saw your entry in the emergency system, I came personally. And yes, room 23. It was my mother's room. And my sister's before her, he completed. I kept it as a kind of memorial, a constant reminder of the price of silence. They were silent for a few moments, the weight of all those revelations hanging between them. Finally, Amelia spoke, her voice calm despite the emotional storm inside her. What happens now? Dante leaned forward slightly, his eyes, so much like hers, seeking connection. That is entirely up to you, Amelia. I don't expect forgiveness or immediate acceptance. I know this is a lot to process at once. And what about my father? I mean, Ezekiel. He doesn't know you're here. At least, not yet. Amelia nodded slowly, thinking about the implications of everything she had just discovered. Her entire life had been built on a foundation of secrets and lies. The man she had believed was her father was, in fact, part of the conspiracy that had destroyed her mother. And the stranger before her, this powerful and tormented doctor, carried the same blood in his veins as she did. I need time, she said finally, to process all of this, to decide what to do. Naturally, Dante agreed. You can stay here for as long as you need. The hospital is a safe place now. And the entrance exam? My dream of studying medicine. A flicker of pride appeared in Dante's eyes. Like your mother, he observed softly. Eleanor always said that true medicine should liberate, not control. If it is still your wish, I can help you prepare for the next exam. I have connections at the university. The offer was tempting, a door to the future she had always wanted. But Amelia couldn't ignore the ethical complications, the unresolved issues. I don't know if I want your help, she admitted honestly. I don't even know who you really are, beyond these revelations. Dante accepted her words without defensiveness, just nodding in understanding. Fair enough, perhaps it's best we get to know each other first, before we talk about the future. A sharp sound interrupted the conversation, Dante's phone signaling an urgent call. I have to take this, he said, standing up. Stay here as long as you need, explore the files. This is as much your story as it is mine. Just be careful. Some truths are more painful than others. He walked to the door, but stopped before leaving, turning to face her one last time. Your mother would be proud of who you've become, Amelia. She was the bravest person I ever knew, and I see that same courage in you. With those words he left, leaving Amelia alone with the ghosts of the past and the uncertain possibilities of the future. For hours she remained in that room, reading, file after file, absorbing the dark history of the hospital, of her mother, of Clara Sterling, of all the women who had been subjected to the redemption protocol. She found photos of Eleanor and Dante together, newspaper clippings about revolutionary treatments at the Sterling Institute, internal reports on problematic patients and successful cases. Each document was a piece of the puzzle, each revelation a brushstroke in the portrait of an era of institutionalized control over female minds and bodies. And amidst it all, the love story of her biological parents, a love born of resistance, suffocated by oppression, but which had survived in the form of the daughter who was now discovering the truth. When she finally returned to room 23 through the secret passage, night had already fallen over Charlotte. The city lights twinkled outside, thousands of luminous points that seemed to reflect the new possibilities opening up in her mind. Lying in the bed that had once been her mother's, Amelia wept, not just with sadness for the loss of a truth she had never known, but also with relief for finally understanding the silences that had always surrounded her. And when the tears dried, a resolution began to crystallize in her heart. Regardless of what she decided about Dante, about her future, one thing was certain. The cycle of silence that had defined her life until now was broken forever. As sleep finally enveloped her, one thought persisted. Room 23 was not just a physical space. It was a meeting point between past and present, between buried secrets and revealed truths, a threshold between what had been and what could be. And now, for the first time in her life, Amelia felt free to choose which side of the door she wanted to be on. Downstairs in his private office, Dante Sterling remained awake, looking at an old photograph of Eleanor holding a baby Amelia. His fingers traced the outline of the face of the woman he had loved, while his mind navigated the ocean of guilt, hope, and possibilities that the meeting with his daughter had awakened. 21 years of secrets, of forced distance, of silent observation, and now finally the truth was coming to light. For better or for worse, fate had conspired to bring father and daughter together in the very space where it all began. Room 23, the epicenter of a story that, as he well knew, was still far from over. Especially because somewhere in Ashes Hollow, Pastor Ezekiel Monroe had just received an anonymous phone call informing him that his daughter was a patient at Sterling Medical Center under the personal care of Dr. Dante Sterling. Morning arrived at Sterling Medical Center with the inevitability of a tide that cannot be held back. The first rays of sun pierced the large windows of room 23, finding Amelia already awake, sitting in the armchair by the window, watching Charlotte awaken with eyes that had seen little sleep during the night. How could one sleep, after all, when the world she had known for 21 years had just crumbled and reconfigured into a new and disturbing reality? How could she surrender to rest when every memory of her childhood now had to be re-evaluated in the light of the newly discovered truth? The physical pain that had brought her to the hospital had virtually disappeared, replaced by a deeper, more complex pain, the pain of uprooting, of a fractured identity. Who was she now? Amelia Monroe, daughter of Pastor Ezekiel, raised under the weight of silence and guilt, or the daughter of Eleanor Alden and Dante Sterling, heir to a story of love and resistance brutally cut short? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Regina, the older nurse, bringing breakfast. "Good morning, dear. I brought something special today," she said with a gentle smile, placing the tray on the side table. There were fresh fruits, whole wheat bread, cream cheese, natural juice, and a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Thank you, Regina," Amelia replied, trying to smile despite her internal turmoil. "That's very kind." The nurse watched her for a moment with experienced eyes, noticing the dark circles, the tension in her shoulders. "You found out, didn't you?" she asked softly, without needing to specify what. Amelia looked at her, surprised. "You knew?" Regina nodded, perching on the edge of the bed. "I've been at this hospital longer than almost anyone, dear. I saw Eleanor arrive as a brilliant nurse and leave as a patient. I saw a young Dr. Dante transform from an idealistic doctor into a broken man, and then be reborn as the determined reformer he is today." She paused, her eyes distant, lost in memories. "And I saw you as a baby in your mother's arms in this very room. You knew her well?" "My mother?" Regina's face softened with the memory. Eleanor was pure light, Amelia. Intelligent, brave, determined to make a difference. When she saw an injustice, she couldn't stay quiet. A sad smile curved her lips. That's what put her on a collision course with the old Dr. Sterling, and what drew her to Dante. What were they like together? Amelia couldn't help but ask, hungry for any fragment of her biological parents' story. "Like fire and wind," Regina answered, her face lighting up with the memory. "He restrained and methodical, she impulsive and passionate. He taught her how to navigate the system. She taught him to question the system itself. They were perfect together, despite all their differences." Silent tears began to stream down Amelia's face. They were tears for the mother she had never truly known, for the father she had just met, for the lost time, for the stolen possibilities. Regina took a tissue from the nightstand and offered it, a simple kindness that unleashed more emotion. "What should I do now, Regina?" Amelia asked, suddenly feeling like a lost child. The nurse held her hands with reassuring firmness. "No one can tell you that, dear. But I can tell you one thing your mother always used to say. The truth may hurt, but silence kills." Eleanor believed that knowing the truth, however painful, was always better than living a comfortable lie. Amelia nodded slowly, absorbing those words, a small legacy from her mother, passed on through this woman who had known her. Dr. Sterling, Dante, is he a good man? She asked, needing some guidance on this stranger who was her biological father. Regina considered the question carefully. He carries a lot of guilt, Amelia. For his sister's death, for what happened to your mother for not being able to raise you, she answered honestly. It's made him reserved, sometimes cold. But deep down, yes, I believe he is a good man. One who has tried to right his family's wrongs, even when it would have been easier to simply ignore them. The conversation was interrupted by another knock on the door, firmer, more urgent. Regina stood up quickly. That must be him. He asked to be notified as soon as you were awake. But when the door opened, it was not Dante Sterling's face that appeared. It was Pastor Ezekiel Monroe's, his tall, austere figure filling the doorway like a sentence. Father. The word escaped Amelia's lips automatically, though she now knew he was not her biological father. Ezekiel's eyes, cold as river stones, swept across the luxurious room before settling on her. So it's true, his voice was controlled but vibrated with a contained rage. My own daughter lying, running away to the capital, and now admitted to this in place. Regina subtly stepped between them. Mr. Monroe, your daughter is recovering. Perhaps you can talk later when— Leave, he ordered, without even looking at her. This is a family matter. The nurse hesitated, glancing at Amelia with evident concern. It's all right, Regina, Amelia assured her, gathering her courage. She knew this confrontation was inevitable. You can leave us. Reluctantly, Regina left, but not before whispering to Amelia, I'll get Dr. Sterling. When the door closed, Ezekiel advanced to the center of the room, his presence seeming to shrink the space. A sick friend. That's what you said in your message, he began, each word laden with judgment. Another lie to add to the collection. Like the lie about helping at the church library, when you were actually coming here, to take the entrance exam for medicine. Against my express wishes. Amelia stood up from the armchair, refusing to remain in a position of physical inferiority. How did you know where to find me? She asked, ignoring the accusations. God has his ways of revealing the truth, Amelia, he answered enigmatically. I received an anonymous call. Perhaps an angel sent to open my eyes. An angel or a devil, Amelia thought, wondering who would have an interest in provoking this confrontation. Someone who wanted to harm Dante, or someone who wanted to force a resolution. Tayakomurios, pack your things. We are going home right now, Ezekiel ordered, his tone admitting no argument. For the first time in her life, Amelia did not shrink from that authority. No, the word, small but powerful, hung between them like a challenge. Ezekiel seemed momentarily stunned by the direct refusal. What? I said no, Father. I'm not going back to Ashes Hollow. Not yet. The pastor's face hardened, his features twisting into a mask of controlled fury. So it's true. This place has already begun to corrupt you, just as it corrupted your mother. The mention of Eleanor ignited a spark of anger in Amelia. Don't speak of her. You don't have the right. I have every right, he thundered. Who raised you when that weak, sinful woman abandoned you? Who educated you in the ways of the Lord? Who protected you from worldly temptations? Protected me or imprisoned me? Amelia retorted, years of forced silence finally giving way to the truth. And what about the lies, Father? All the lies about my mother, about who she really was, about what really happened to her. Something flickered in Ezekiel's eyes. Fear. Guilt? What are you talking about? I know everything, Amelia declared, her voice gaining strength. I know about the redemption protocol, about how my mother was committed here against her will. I know you agreed to raise me as part of a deal with the hospital. And I know who my real father is. The pastor visibly paled, taking a step back as if he had been physically struck. That doctor, he has poisoned your mind with lies. They're not lies. I've seen the documents, the records, and now looking at you, I see the confirmation in your eyes. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sound of hospital activity beyond the door. Ezekiel seemed to be struggling internally, his face a battle between anger and something that might be remorse. You don't understand what I did for you, he said finally, his voice lower, almost defensive. Eleanor was my distant cousin. When she came to me, pregnant and desperate, I took her in. I offered her protection, a respectable name for the child. In exchange for what? Amelia pressed. For nothing, he insisted, but then hesitated. Only, she needed to accept our way of life, our values, for her own good. For my good, or to satisfy your need for control. Amelia felt decades of unarticulated resentment surfacing. You kept her a prisoner just as you kept me. The difference is that she found the courage to try to escape. She was unstable. She got involved with a married man. Got pregnant, nearly ruined her career. Ezekiel was shouting now, his facade of religious calm completely shattered. Married man? Amelia frowned, confused. Dante wasn't married. Is that what he told you? The pastor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Of course he was married, to a doctor. He had a perfect life, until your mother got in the way. An ambitious nurse, seducing the hospital heir to advance her career. The room door flew open abruptly before Amelia could respond. Dante Sterling entered, followed closely by Regina. His face was tense but composed, his grey eyes fixed on Ezekiel. That's enough, Pastor Monroe, he said, his voice low but authoritative. I will not allow you to continue poisoning Amelia with more lies. Ezekiel turned to face him, a look of contempt twisting his features. Look at you, doctor, so controlled, so respectable. Amelia deserves to know what kind of man you really are. She deserves the truth, Dante agreed, stepping closer. The whole truth, not just the distorted version you've built to justify your own actions. The pastor let out a bitter laugh. The truth? You don't even know what that is. Amelia intervened, unable to bear any more of this confrontation without clear answers. Stop. You both claim you want to protect me, to spare me, but all you've done is deny me the right to my own history. Her voice trembled slightly but remained steady. I want to know everything now. No more filters, no more pious lies. Dante and Ezekiel exchanged looks heavy with old animosity. It was Regina who broke the stalemate, approaching Amelia with a grave expression. Perhaps I can help, the nurse offered. I was here during that entire period. I saw everything happen. Amelia nodded, grateful for a potentially neutral voice in this storm of accusations. Please. Regina took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into turbulent waters. Dante was not married when he met Eleanor, she began, looking firmly at Ezekiel. That is a lie. He was engaged. Yes, to Helen Vance, a neurologist. An arranged marriage between influential families, with no real love. Ezekiel made a move to interrupt, but Regina held up a hand, silencing him with surprising authority. When Dante and Eleanor fell in love, he broke off the engagement immediately. It was a scandal in high society, of course, but it was honest. What the pastor isn't telling you, she continued, now addressing Amelia directly, is that Eleanor initially sought him out not because she was pregnant, but because she had discovered the redemption protocol and needed a safe place. She came to me asking for spiritual help, Ezekiel defended himself. She was confused, lost. She came to you because you were her only living relative, and she believed you would help her expose what was happening at the hospital, Regina corrected. But instead you saw an opportunity. What opportunity? Amelia asked, feeling they were getting to the heart of the matter. A heavy silence fell over the room. It was Dante who finally answered, his voice filled with old pain. A financial opportunity. The old Dr. Sterling, my father, offered Ezekiel a considerable sum to keep Eleanor under control, away from the public eye. That is a blasphemous lie. Ezekiel exploded, but the tremor in his voice betrayed a deep guilt. How much? Amelia asked, her voice dangerously calm. Amelia, it doesn't matter. How much? The word came out as a shout, surprising everyone, including herself. Ezekiel looked down, unable to meet the accusing gaze of the daughter he had raised. Enough to build the new church, he murmured. To expand our ministry. It was all for the Lord's work, Amelia. Not for me. And my mother? Was she just a bargaining chip? She needed spiritual guidance, Ezekiel insisted, but his defense sounded increasingly hollow. Dr. Augustus Sterling agreed she would be better treated outside the hospital environment, away from temptation. And when we found out she was pregnant, you decided I needed to be saved too, Amelia completed, the horrific understanding finally crystallizing. It was an arrangement from the beginning. My mother never had a choice. She had choices and she made the wrong ones. Ezekiel raised his voice again. Getting involved with that man. He pointed accusingly at Dante, challenging medical authority. And when she was finally on the path to redemption, she tried to run away, taking you with her. She was trying to save us, Dante shouted, his composure finally breaking. From your father, from you, from everyone who wanted to control her mind, her body, her future. And you, he took a threatening step toward the pastor. You betrayed her. You called my father the night she planned to escape. You are just as responsible for her death as the men who chased her. The accusation hung in the air like a sentence. Amelia looked at the man she had called father her whole life, searching for a denial, an explanation, anything that could contradict that terrible charge. But Ezekiel just closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in silent defeat. It was the right thing to do, he mumbled, more to himself than to the others. She was possessed by demons of rebellion. She would have ruined her life and the child's. She was free, Amelia's voice exploded, charged with 2 decades of repressed emotion. Free to love, free to decide, free to raise me as she saw fit. And you took that from her. You took that from me. Tears streamed freely down her face now, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of anger, of grief, of liberation. You were never my father, she declared, each word a nail in the coffin of her old life. You were my jailer. Ezekiel flinched as if he had been slapped. Everything I did was to protect you. No, Amelia interrupted, with a sudden, devastating clarity. Everything you did was to control me, so that I would never become like her, free, strong, capable of challenging men like you. A heavy silence followed her words. Regina had tears in her eyes. Dante looked both proud and devastated. And Ezekiel, the powerful authoritarian pastor Ezekiel, suddenly seemed small, old, defeated. What happens now? He asked finally, his voice devoid of its usual authority. It was Dante who answered, regaining his composure. That is entirely for Amelia to decide. All eyes turned to her, the daughter, the heir, the pivot of this tragic story that had begun before she was even born. Amelia felt the weight of that moment, the responsibility of the choice. For 21 years, others had decided her fate. Now, finally, it was her turn. I'm not going back to Asher's Hollow, she declared firmly. Not with you. That life is over for me. Ezekiel opened his mouth to protest, but she held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not finished. I'm also not staying here dependent on Dante or anyone else, she continued, surprising everyone, including herself, with the clarity of her decision. I need space, time to process all this, to find out who I am without all these lies and manipulations. Dante stepped forward, his grey eyes, so like hers, shining with restrained emotion. Amelia, I know it's a lot to absorb, but I would like to get to know you, to try to make up for the lost years. Make up for it, she interrupted, not with anger but with honesty. No one can make up for what I've lost, what we've all lost. You can't turn back time, Dante. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth in her words. You're right. I can't change the past, but I can offer a future, he said carefully. Financial independence, a chance to study medicine if that is still your wish. No strings, no expectations. Why? She asked simply. Because it's what Eleanor would have wanted, he replied, his voice low but firm, and because even without the privilege of raising you, I am proud of the woman you have become. Strong like her, resilient despite everything. Amelia considered his words, feeling a strange but undeniable connection to this man who was half of her biological origin. It wasn't love, it wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps. I will accept your help to study, she decided finally, but on my terms. I will find my own place to live, I will make my own way. And as for us, she made a vague gesture between them, we'll see in time. No promises. Dante nodded, accepting her conditions without hesitation. And what about me? Ezekiel's voice sounded small, almost childish in its vulnerability. Amelia looked at the man who had raised her, feeling a complex mix of anger, pity, and, surprisingly, gratitude. You gave me a home, an education, values, she acknowledged. For that I will be eternally grateful. But you also denied me the truth, deprived me of my mother, tried to shape me in your image instead of letting me discover my own. She paused, searching for the right words. I don't hate you, Father, but I need to step away. Maybe one day we can build something new based on honesty. But not now. Not yet. A single tear ran down the pastor's aged face, the first Amelia had ever seen. He nodded in silence, accepting his sentence. May God protect you then, he murmured, turning to leave. Just one more thing, Amelia called out, making him stop at the door. My mother's records, the letters she wrote, anything you've kept. I want it all. Ezekiel looked as if he might refuse, but then he just nodded in defeat. I'll send everything. So it's yours by right. And with that, he left, carrying the weight of his own choices, leaving behind the woman who was no longer his daughter, if she ever truly had been. The silence that followed his departure was profound, almost reverential. Regina was the first to break it, approaching Amelia and hugging her tightly. Your mother is watching over you now, I'm sure of it, the nurse whispered. And she is as proud as I am. When they pulled apart, Regina smiled at Dante. I'll leave you two alone. You have a lot to talk about. After she left, the biological father and daughter found themselves alone for the first time, the weight of 2 decades of separation hanging between them. What happens now? Dante asked, echoing the question Ezekiel had asked moments before, but with a vulnerability the pastor had never shown. Amelia looked out the window, at the vastness of Charlotte spreading out under the morning sun, a city of possibilities, of new beginnings. Now, she answered, tasting true freedom for the first time, I finally begin to live my own life. In the months that followed, Amelia discovered that rebuilding a life from the ashes of lies is a slow, sometimes painful, but profoundly liberating process. She settled into a small apartment in Charlotte's South End, paid for by the trust Dante had set up for her years ago. Contrary to what she had feared, he respected her desire for independence, maintaining a respectful distance available when asked, never imposing. She enrolled in an intensive pre-med course, preparing to fulfill her dream of studying medicine at UNC. The studies were demanding, but for the first time, she felt free to immerse herself in her fascination with the human body, with science, with healing, without guilt, without fear, without the weight of betraying some family legacy. The boxes from Ezekiel arrived 3 weeks after she left the hospital, 4 cardboard boxes containing all of Eleanor's documentation he had kept. Photographs, diplomas, letters, even a diary. Amelia spent entire nights absorbing every fragment, finally getting to know the woman behind the myth the pastor had created. She discovered a brilliant, passionate, complex Eleanor, a woman who had fought the system, who had loved deeply, who had dreamed of raising her daughter in freedom. In her words, written on pages yellowed by time, Amelia found not only her mother, but parts of herself she never knew existed. Her relationship with Dante evolved slowly, beginning with bi-weekly lunches in neutral restaurants far from the hospital. Cautious conversations about medicine, about life, gradually made way for memories of Eleanor, for acknowledgements of similarities between father and daughter, the same furrowing of brows when concentrating, the same passion for solving problems, the same inability to tolerate injustice. It wasn't a perfect relationship. There were moments of tension, occasional recriminations, silences heavy with unanswered questions. But it was real, honest, built on difficult truths instead of comfortable lies. In December of that year, when the university admission results were released, Amelia found out she had been accepted with top honors into the UNC medical program. The news came while she was in Dante's private office at the hospital, no longer room 23, which now remained closed, but a new, bright, open space on the ground floor. I did it, she announced, barely able to contain her emotion as she showed him the result on her phone. Top of the list. The pride on Dante's face was so pure, so genuine, that for a moment all the complications of their relationship seemed to disappear. Your mother always knew you would be exceptional, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ever since you were just a possibility, a dream we shared. It was the first time they hugged, an embrace that was hesitant at first, then firm, laden with complex emotions, with mutual recognition, with a connection that transcended the mistakes of the past. The following week, Dante invited her to his home, an elegant but surprisingly warm penthouse in the Myers Park neighborhood. It was the first time she had visited his private space, seen beyond the controlled doctor, beyond the tormented air of a hospital empire. There, he introduced her to his most personal project, the Eleanor Alden Foundation, an organization he had quietly created years before, dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships, situations of control, and manipulation. I started it with my own resources after your mother. After the accident, he explained, showing her the Foundation's reports which had already helped hundreds of women across the country. It was my way of keeping her essence alive, of continuing the work she started by challenging the redemption protocol. "Why did you never tell me about this?" Amelia asked, deeply touched by this demonstration of enduring love. "I wanted you to know me for who I am now, not for the gestures I made in the past," he answered honestly. "I didn't want it to seem like an attempt to buy your forgiveness or affection." Amelia nodded, understanding a decision that, for the first time, seemed motivated not by control or manipulation, but by genuine respect for her autonomy. "I'd like to get involved," she said, after examining the reports more closely. "During medical school I can dedicate a few hours a week, and maybe eventually." She left the sentence open, but they both understood the implication. A joint project, a shared legacy, a future built on the ashes of the past, but not defined by them. The next week on Christmas Eve, Amelia did something she hadn't planned. She visited Asher's Hollow. Not to return to Ezekiel's control, but to close that chapter on her own terms. She found the pastor aged, diminished, his former arrogance replaced by a reflective quietness. The house that had once been her prison seemed smaller, less oppressive, or perhaps it was she who had grown beyond its walls. "I came to say a proper goodbye," she said, sitting at the kitchen table where so many silent meals had been shared, "and to thank you for what was good." Ezekiel watched her with moist eyes, a belated recognition that the submissive girl he had raised had transformed into a strong, confident, free woman, everything he had feared, everything he had tried to prevent. "You're so much like her," he said finally, "not just in looks, in strength." It was the closest to an admission she would get from him, an acknowledgement that Eleanor had not been the demon he had painted for years, but a woman of character and determination, qualities he now saw reflected in her daughter. "I passed my exams," she told him. "I'm going to study medicine." Her dream, too. Ezekiel nodded slowly. "May God bless you on that path." It wasn't approval, it wasn't forgiveness from either side. It was simply acceptance, a recognition that their paths, so long forcibly joined, would now go in different directions, and maybe someday they could cross again on healthier terms. Before leaving, Amelia left a small package on the table, a framed portrait of Eleanor she had found among the documents, smiling in her nurse's uniform. "So you can remember her as she really was," she said simply, "not as the version you needed to create to justify your choices." On New Year's Eve, Amelia found herself back at Sterling Medical Center, but not as a patient. At Dante's invitation, she was there for the inauguration of the new Eleanor Alden Center for Women's Mental Health, a wing entirely dedicated to the humane and respectful treatment of women with psychological issues. The old Room 23 had been transformed into the heart of this new center, no longer a place of confinement, but an open space of welcome, where the first thing patients saw upon entering was a panel with the faces of all the women who had been subjected to the redemption protocol. Not as anonymous victims, but as recognized survivors, their names and stories preserved so that those mistakes would never be forgotten or repeated. "I'd like you to say a few words," Dante invited. As the inauguration ceremony was about to begin, Amelia hesitated, surprised. "Why me? I barely know the full story yet." "Because you are living proof that the cycle can be broken," he replied. "That silence can give way to truth. That control can be replaced by choice. You are Eleanor's daughter, in every sense that matters." Given that explanation, she accepted, stepping up to the small makeshift stage before doctors, nurses, patients, and members of the press. Her initial nervousness was quickly replaced by a sense of purpose, of historical continuity. "Room 23 has a history," she began, her voice clear and firm. "A history of silence, of control, of pain, but also of resistance, of love, and finally, of true redemption, not the kind imposed from the outside in, but the kind born from truth, however painful it may be. She looked at Dante, who was watching her with a mixture of pride and contained emotion, and continued, "My mother, Eleanor Alden, was one of the many women whose voices they tried to silence within these walls. But silence is never eternal. The truth always finds a way to emerge, like water that inevitably breaks the dams that try to contain it." Regina, now officially the director of nursing for the new center, smiled through her tears. Other older professionals, those who had known Eleanor, who had witnessed the hospital's dark era, nodded in silent recognition. "This new center is not just an architectural renovation," Amelia went on. "It is a renovation of values, of purpose, of a commitment to female autonomy. It is an acknowledgement that mental health cannot exist without freedom, without respect, without the fundamental right of every person to define their own path." She paused, looking directly at the cameras recording the moment. "And to all the women who still live trapped in invisible rooms, in controlling relationships, in oppressive families, in institutions that deny them a voice, I leave this message. Silence can be broken, the truth can be discovered, and freedom, once experienced, cannot be forgotten." When she finished her speech, the applause was spontaneous, emotional. Dante approached, his eyes shining with pride, and for a moment Amelia glimpsed what could have been a whole family, united, Eleanor beside them, celebrating together. But that alternate reality would remain only a possibility, a dream of what might have been. What mattered now was what they could build from here. Not perfect, not without scars, but authentic, based on difficult truths instead of comfortable lies. Later that night, as Charlotte erupted in fireworks celebrating the new year, Amelia found herself alone in the old room 23, now a welcoming reception area. The wall that had hidden the secret passage had been removed, the corridor exposed and integrated into the new design, symbolizing a commitment to transparency. There, sitting in the armchair where weeks before she had discovered her true history, Amelia took from her pocket the only personal object of Eleanor's she always carried, a small silver pendant in the shape of a key, found among the belongings sent by Ezekiel. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, clutching the pendant in her fingers. "The silence is broken. Room 23 is no longer a prison." And as the first minutes of the new year unfolded, Amelia felt a peace she had never known before. Not the false serenity of ignorance, but the deep peace that comes from facing the truth in all its complexity and still choosing to move forward, free, strong, complete in her incompleteness. Room 23 had been the epicenter of a story of control and silencing. Now, at the hands of Eleanor and Dante's daughter, it had become a symbol of liberation, of reclaimed voice, of broken cycles. And somewhere, perhaps in that very room,